name is Pietro Karras,
I am Kyle Bausch.
and here's your daily dose of American accounting scandals. WorldCom Inc. was not just the biggest accounting scandal in the history of the United States, but also one of the biggest bankruptcies. Coming in at the third largest bankruptcy in U.S. history, following Lehman Brothers and Washington Mutual, the telecommunications giant had cooked its books, rocking the financial markets. At one point, WorldCom was the largest internet company in the world and the second largest long-distance phone company in the United States. In 1983, businessmen Murray Waldron and William Rector sketched out a plan to create a discount long-distance provider called LDDS, or Long Distance Discount Service. In 1985, early investor Bernard Ebbers becomes CEO of LDDS. By 1995, LDDS had acquired William Telecom Group for $2.5 billion and changed its name to WorldCom Inc. By 1998, WorldCom completes three mergers with MCI Communications Corp. for $40 billion, the largest in history at the time, and Brooks Fiber Properties Inc. at $1.2 billion. In 1999, WorldCom and Sprint Corp. agreed to merge, but by 2000, the US and European regulators blocked the proposed merger with Sprint, causing WorldCom and Sprint to terminate the entire agreement. Multiple mergers from the start of the company until 2001 helped build the huge company that they were at the time.
In 2002, WorldCom's fortunes really took a turn for the worse. Starting on March 11th, WorldCom received a request for information from the U.S. SEC relating to accounting procedures and loans to officers. On April 3rd, WorldCom said it was cutting 3,700 jobs in the U.S., which was 6% of their group staff and 4% of their overall workforce. On April 30th, WorldCom CEO Bernard Ebbers resigned amid slumping share prices and an SEC probe of the company's support of his personal loans, and John Sidgmore, vice chairman, took over the reins of the company. On May 9th, Moody's cut WorldCom's long-term debt ratings to junk status, citing the company's deteriorating operating performance, debt, and expectations for further weakness. On May 10th, Standard & Poor's cut WorldCom's credit rating to junk status, and on May 13th, they removed them from their S&P 500 index. On May 15th, WorldCom said it would draw down a $2.65 billion bank credit line as it negotiates for a new $5 billion funding pact with its lenders. On May 21st, WorldCom said it will scrap dividend payments and eliminate its two tracking stocks. On May 23rd, WorldCom secured $1.5 billion in new funding to replace a larger $2 billion credit line. On June 5th, WorldCom said it will exit the wireless resale business and cut jobs to reduce expenses and pare massive debts. On June 25th, they fired their chief financial officer after uncovering improper accounting of $3.8 billion in expenses that covered up a net loss in 2001 and the first quarter of 2002, and that they will be cutting 17,000 jobs. On June 26th, NASDAQ market halted trading in WorldCom's two tracking stocks, WorldCom Group and MCI Group, and President George W. Bush called for a full investigation of the matter as their stocks touched 9 cents before the halt. On June 28th, WorldCom laid off another 17,000 workers, including 2,000 in the Washington area. On July 1st, WorldCom revealed that an internal investigation uncovered questionable accounting practice stretching back to as far as 1999. On July 2nd, WorldCom CEO John Sidgmore appeared at a Washington press conference to apologize for the company's accounting scandal. On July 8th, former chief executives Bernard Ebbers and Scott Sullivan refused to answer questions posed by a congressional committee. And on July 9th, John Sidgmore, the CEO, said the company only has enough cash to keep operating for 2 more months, saying that it's growing more likely they will file for bankruptcy. On July 17th, a source told the Washington Post that WorldCom has secured a $2 billion financing package that it would use to operate under bankruptcy protection. On July 21st, WorldCom filed for bankruptcy protection, listing some $107 billion in assets and $41 billion in debt, which was now the largest filing in U.S. history. CEO John Sidgmore said the company plans to emerge from protection within 9 to 12 months, and that the company will have access to $2 billion in funding, but does not plan to tap all of it.
Continuing in 2002, on July 29th, WorldCom names 2 specialists from Alix Partners LLC to oversee its reorganization and straighten its finances. Gregory Rayburn was appointed Chief Reconstructing Officer, and John Dubell was hired as Chief Financial Officer. On August 1st, WorldCom's former Chief Financial Officer Scott Sullivan and former Controller David Myers are arrested for their role in the scandal. The two were charged in the 7-court complaint accusing them of securities fraud and filing false statements with the Securities and Exchange Commission. On August 9th, WorldCom's internal auditors have uncovered an additional $3.8 billion in improper accounting, doubling the amount of its known accounting errors to move more than $7.6 billion over the past 2 years. On August 17th, the Washington Post reports that members of WorldCom's board support removing CEO John Sigmore. On August 22nd, news reports state that a complex deal with WorldCom accounts for some of the revenue America Online previously announced it may be improperly booking. On September 11th, WorldCom Chief Executive John W. Sigmore agrees to step aside from his top post. On September 27th, WorldCom Inc.'s former controller, David F. Myers, pleaded guilty to 3 counts of conspiracy, securities fraud, and making false statements to the Securities and Exchange Commission. On October 7th, Buford Yates Jr., WorldCom Inc.'s former accounting director, pleads guilty to 2 counts of security fraud and conspiracy. On October 18th, prosecutors charged 2 former finance officials with 2 counts of conspiracy and securities fraud in separate proceedings. On November 6th, SEC expands fraud case against WorldCom Inc. with claims that the company's improper bookkeeping dates back to at least 1999, totaling over $9 billion in fraudulent activity. On November 21st, WorldCom plans to lay off 3,000 workers in the coming month in an effort to trim the company's costs and emerge from bankruptcy. On November 27th, WorldCom reaches an initial statement with SEC in which the company must continue to submit federal oversight. On December 18th, 6 WorldCom directors resign, and on November 20th, despite the financial woes, WorldCom is awarded contract to provide global communication service to State Department.
In 2003, on February 3rd, WorldCom announced that it was laying off an additional 5,000 more employees. On March 12th, federal prosecutors asked WorldCom to delay the release of the company's accounting investigations while they examined new evidence that could incriminate former CEO Bernard Evers. On March 14th, WorldCom announced that it would take a one-time $79.8 billion write-off. On April 15th, WorldCom unveiled a reorganization plan that would erase most of its debt, rename the company after its long-distance unit MCI, and move its headquarters from Clinton, Mississippi to Ashburn, Virginia. On April 22nd, former CFO Scott D. Sullivan pled not guilty to securities and bank fraud. On May 19th, WorldCom agreed to pay investors $500 million to settle civil fraud charges. On July 7th, a federal judge approved a $750 million settlement between WorldCom and federal regulators. On July 26th, sources say that the Justice Department was investigating allegations that WorldCom improperly rerouted long-distance calls. On August 6th, a bankruptcy judge approved a $750 million settlement of civil fraud charges made by the SEC on WorldCom investors' behalf. On August 27th, Oklahoma Attorney General Drew Edmondson filed criminal charges against WorldCom and 6 former executives, including founder Bernard Evers. On September 3rd, WorldCom CEO Bernard Evers pled not guilty to charges that he violated Oklahoma fraud and securities laws. On September 12th, a federal bankruptcy judge signed off on WorldCom's revised bankruptcy plan and allowed the company to send it out to creditors for their approval. On October 14th, WorldCom announced the appointment of a chief ethics officer who will report directly to the CEO. On October 31st, bankruptcy judge Arthur J. Gonzalez approved WorldCom's reorganization plan. And on December 22nd, 2003, federal prosecutors say they intend to show that former WorldCom CFO Scott Sullivan was involved in 13 kinds of accounting fraud in addition to the financial wrongdoing with which he is charged.
In 2004, on January 7th, the government lifts a 5-month suspension that had kept WorldCom from receiving new federal contracts. On January 12th, company officials say that WorldCom is putting the finishing touches on 3 years of financial reinstatements, but should emerge from bankruptcy protection by a court-imposed deadline of February 28, 2003. On January 15th, sources confirmed that WorldCom is planning to lay off an additional 1,700 employees, about 3% of its entire workforce. On March 15th, WorldCom becomes the latest in a string of companies to split the jobs of chairman and chief executive. In 2005, on January 8th, the lead plaintiff in the WorldCom class action suit formally announces a $54 million settlement covering 10 former WorldCom directors. On January 19th, jury selection begins in the trial of WorldCom's former CEO, Bernard J. Evers. On January 25th, opening statements are heard in the trial of Bernard J. Evers. On February 2nd, a federal judge rejects part of a groundbreaking settlement in which 10 former WorldCom directors agree to pay $54 million to settle a shareholder lawsuit. On March 15th, former WorldCom Inc. CEO Bernard J. Evers is found guilty of conspiracy, securities fraud, and making false filings with regulators. Now here's our specialist in ethics and decision making, Christina Galfaro.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your introduction, Pete. Now, when discussing a business scandal this large, you have to ask, but why and how? Well, for Worldcom, when the tech boom turned to a bust and companies slashed spending on telecom services and equipment, Worldcom resorted to accounting tricks to maintain the appearance of ever-growing profitability. By this time, many investors had become suspicious of CEO Bernie Ebbers' story. Shortly after this, Ebbers was forced to step down as CEO in April of 2002. It was revealed that he had, in 2000, borrowed $400 million from Bank of America to cover margin calls using his Worldcom shares as collateral. As a result, Ebbers lost his fortune. They capitalized their long-distance line calls on the balance sheet as prepaid capacity, rather than recording them as expenses on the income statement. The line costs amount to be the single largest expense for telecommunications companies. This inflated their net income and fooled their investors into thinking that the company was better off financially than they actually were. Now, after researching and analyzing what students may learn in a master's level course, some decision-making experts estimate that half of the decisions in organizations fail. Now you may ask why. Well, in most cases, managers impose solutions when there is a limit on alternatives. They use their power to implement their plans and decide poorly. So you're probably wondering what all these words are behind me, why they're there, and what they mean. So these are a few different areas that relate to the decisions that were made by CEO Bernie Ebbers about this incident and how it ties back to MBA615. So the first one we're going to discuss is Simon's normative model. This model was introduced by Herbert Simon, and it was created to enhance our understanding of the decision-making process. The model touches upon two different categories, the first being bounded rationality. Now this relates to external forces such as the ability to generate more capital, laws and regulations, and social and physical environment. The next is finding satisfaction with your decision. Basically, where you would find a solution that is just good enough. You stop looking for alternatives when you find that something works, which is very similar to what Bernie Ebbers did. He found a situation that generated enough money for his company to fulfill their social and financial needs, and he stopped looking for any other alternatives or an ethical approach to it and decided to act unethically. Now, this model also analyzes intelligence, which deals with the problem identification and the data collection on the problem. It also touches upon design, which deals with the generation of alternative solutions to the problem at hand. And lastly, the choice that needs to be made, which is selecting the best solution from amongst the alternative solutions using some criteria. The next order of business I'd like to discuss is confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is seeking information to support what we already believe and rejecting information that disproves us. So basically stating that the more invested we become in a decision, the harder it is to change our minds, even with scientific evidence. And Ebbers even convinced their trustworthy auditor, which was Anderson accounting firm in Chicago at the time, to also comply with this unethical decision. The Rumia and Jago model, as you can see here, is another decision-making model designed to help you identify the best decision-making approach and leadership style to take based on your current situation as a business leader or manager. In this situation, CEO Ebbers is an autocratic decision maker. He decided on using his own information he already had, and as CEO, he had more expertise on the subject. There was also little time available to make this decision in an attempt to save the company, and he was very confident about acting alone. Ebbers is now serving a 25-year sentence for corporate securities fraud and conspiracy. Thousands of people have not only lost their jobs, but they've lost pensions and chances for other jobs. People who are also a part of the Anderson accounting firm lost their jobs and their future careers as well. So this not only affected Ebbers as a whole and his family, but also everyone else who was involved in the company. Thanks for tuning in to News 8 and viewing our segment on the Worldcom fraudulent activity and decision-making process behind it. Have a great night, everybody.